Hi, welcome to the State Room, a podcast dedicated to covering the key issues and events that will define the future of Arizona. I'm your host, Scot Mussi. Today on our program, we're going to be talking about one of the largest and most disturbing fraud scandals ever to hit the state of Arizona. The details are sordid and frankly, almost unbelievable. Billions have been stolen from Arizona's Medicaid program as a result of fraudulent billing practices. Native Americans have been recruited into sham programs. Patients have been defrauded, zero oversight, and dealing with the governor that seems to be more interested in pointing fingers than trying to fix the problem. Today, joining me on the program to discuss this issue and the big Medicaid scandal that's costing Arizona billions of dollars is State Senator Carine Werner from Legislative District 4. Senator Werner represents the Scottsdale area and also is the chairman of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee in the State Senate. Carine, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
So yeah, it's a huge scandal, been going on for a while, kind of confusing. It's kind of hard to get your arms around how this all unfolded and what's been happening. And so you've been spending years investigating this, looking into what's been going on, holding hearings at the state Senate, talking about it. When did you first hear about this? What was going on with this Medicaid scandal? And when did you realize that this was far bigger than what most people ever even realized?
In 2025, we were hearing chatter at the Capitol, and it was little complaints that Access was not paying providers. And we had a few meetings, and then we ended session. And I came home one day to an article in Channel 12 news article, and it talked about this Pakistani man who had fleeced our system for $650 million in Medicaid fraud in these sham behavioral health facilities. And I realized then that I had to take action. And so I called my staff. We got a hearing on the calendar, and that's how we really started with this. And what has been great is there were so many people that were willing to come forward and share what had happened, people who worked at Access. And Access is Arizona's Medicaid agency. And providers came forward, people who were affected by the moratorium that was put on this when this particular governor took over. And it has been eye-opening. It is massive, and it is hard to get your mind around everything that's happened.
Yeah. So how did this scheme work? And primarily it was up on the reservations, right? There was these individuals that were operating this scheme. Yeah. They're doing them on the reservation, using Native Americans as what do you want to call them, as straw individuals to defraud the program. Is that a good way to describe it?
Yes. So in and around 2019-ish, there were people coming into the state who sometimes were not even from this country, and they would get these behavioral health licenses through DHS, and sometimes they would use a billing company to help them. So billing company becomes key later on, and they would open up facilities. They bought white vans, and they would drive onto the reservations, and they would pick up Native Americans who were drunk or on drugs and then brought into the valley. They were promised housing, food, and treatment, and to be taken care of.
So they're scooping up people with substance abuse issues and bringing them into their scheme.
Yes. And what they got was they did have a roof over their head. They were not allowed to leave, and they were given drugs and alcohol and kept there while the operators of the facility was billing our Medicaid agency.
And what were they telling the Medicaid agency that they were doing to help these people?
So they were billing under codes, and this particular population is covered under an American Indian Health Program, and it was just also called fee-for-service, and we'll refer to it moving forward as fee-for-service. So fee-for-service would pay 57% of whatever a facility billed. And so they would send in bills for $2,500, $5,000, $10,000 a day for treatment for these individuals.
So they're claiming that these people have substance abuse issues, or they probably do. Most of these individuals do. And then tell our state access program, the Medicaid program, hey, we're helping to treat these people. Yes. Give us money.
Yes.
Okay.
And Access did. And so, and in the early years, I don't think anyone understood how massive this was. And so in 2021, Attorney General Brnovich did 14 indictments, 2 so 14 providers that were part of this scheme. And in 2022, under Governor Ducey, they put out a press release on their website on how to report these types of things. And so early on, there were small actions taken, but no one had any idea how massive this would end up being.
And it's particularly under this American Indian Health Program.
Yes.
And largely, I would suspect because under federal law, there's additional funds in a bucket for people to access to run these programs. I would imagine, and they're sober living homes.
And technically, under our current licensing, sober living homes do not get paid when they are licensed. So they weren't even licensed, and they were billing and getting paid. So and while they were billing and housing these individuals, there were fights. They were put out on the street, and so essentially these bad actors were billing our Medicaid system. So our taxpayers were paying for these fraudsters to abuse Native Americans. We're counting roughly just over 2,000 Native Americans died over the last several years through this process.
It almost sounds like they were getting paid to keep people drunk and on drugs.
That is correct.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Well, so you come in, you start looking at this. They indict this individual that had defrauded the state for $600 million. He said that was in 2025 that they finally caught up with this individual. Was there any sort of crackdown? Did a crackdown start happening? Governor Hobbs was elected in 2022. What did she do when she came in as this was going on? Because clearly it was a firestorm. It was still happening. What actions did she try to take on this?
So as it was progressing, like I shared earlier, Governor Ducey's team was starting to take some action. And when the governorship changed, leadership also changed at Access. And I will say, a lot of the employees that were there during this time had been there since 2011, 2010. So you have a lot of people who've been around for a very long time. And in May of 2023, there was a moratorium put on payments for these facilities. And that was absolutely reckless. And whoever advised or told the executive that this was the way to go created a massive human massacre. And as they stopped payments, they did not take into account that we actually had a very good provider system, but those good providers were no longer getting paid. The bad actors, they just put the Native Americans out on the street in 110-degree heat. And while Access will say, in their provider participation agreements, when somebody closes, they're supposed to move their patients to another facility. A bad actor's not going to do that. And so you have these thousands of missing or dead Native Americans as a result of this.
So Governor Hobbs came in. They probably saw this was a total scandal that was under their feet that they were trying to deal with, and they decided the best course of action was a blunt instrument. Let's just shut the whole thing down. That's kind of was their approach on it.
That was it, and it's interesting because you have seen in Minnesota they did a similar tactic with the daycare fraud, and also in some other states you had skin replacement fraud, and I've met with Dr. Oz a couple of times, and he also spoke at an event where he shared that the moratorium on daycare fraud worked. The moratorium on the skin replacement fraud worked because there were no human beings in those buildings. Nobody died. And one key thing that he said was when they put that moratorium on, you didn't hear a blip from anyone. And so it worked. But in Arizona, people were up in arms when they did this because people were being abused and they were dying. So it was just a wrong approach, or you could have done that approach as long as you had a safety net for the good providers and able to flush out the good providers from the bad providers.
Well, it sounds like they should have went in and did a real investigation to determine who were the bad actors so you can identify them. It doesn't sound like they did that. It sounds to me like they didn't want to put the work in.
Yeah, it was a broad sweep, and it's tragic what happened, and I really have no words for whoever made those decisions that this was the way to go in this particular environment.
But and that gets into the investigation you've been doing. You've been holding these hearings. How many hearings have you had now on this?
I've held 5 hearings. So the initial hearing went, the first hearing was laughable. So the access providers who spoke, they dodged questions, told half-truths, and we really didn't get anywhere. But what I realized in that hearing was that there was more work to be done. And so this was the first step in being able to hold people at Access accountable. And so we held a second hearing. And then after each hearing, we would send them every question they didn't answer, and they would have to answer it and send it back to us. And so we did this 5 times. But out of all of this, and I have asked Access this, I asked the governor's staff this, who at Access has been held accountable for allowing over $3 billion to walk out the door? And I have yet to receive an answer. The best answer I got was that, well, people resign. And when you allow over $3 billion to walk out the door, you are either participating or you're looking the other way, or you have some influence there. And
you're grossly negligent.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I strongly believe that we need a full investigation into Access, because there are people, and even from people that have come forward and met with me who used to work there, who were reporting fraud or reporting concerns of abuse, and it was swept under the rug. And ultimately, those people reporting were forced out.
And from the legislative perspective, you have the ability to do agency reviews. You have some subpoena power, but you're not an investigative. You can't conduct a criminal investigation. So that raises the obvious next question. What has the Attorney General or other law enforcement, what have they done to investigate this? Have they been willing to work with you and the state Senate on making sure a full criminal investigation is being done within the Access agency?
There has been none. And there has not been, I had met with the Attorney General's team, Mafuku, that's who oversees the Medicaid fraud. And there has been no appetite for it. And so we...
Do you think that's policy or do you think that's political?
Maybe a little bit. I don't know if it's a little bit of both, because the Attorney General is also Medicaid's attorney. So if that's your legal, I think there's a little bit of gray, confusing area right there. But I think that we need the DOJ, we need the feds to come in, or even the governor can do this. The governor can call for a full investigation into Access and their employees to go have a full audit of everyone's laptops or computers that they work on. And 90% of the 1,200 employees at Access work from home.
Yeah, nothing precludes. I mean, again, if there's a conflict there, then Chris Mays needs to farm that out to somebody else to conduct the investigation. I actually don't think there is. I agree with you. There is nothing that prevents the executive agency to go in and say if there's fraud or some sort of wrongdoing going on, that there's an investigation and you bring the AG to investigate what's going on. That should be happening. And that gets back in with the governor's office. You're saying from the beginning, they have not been cooperating with this investigation that you've been doing, have they?
I think they've just been watching on the sidelines from the hearings. There hasn't, they gave me no pushback or anything related to holding the hearings. They're responsive if I ask for something, but there hasn't been any action from the office.
Do you feel like you're getting straight answers from them?
From her, from the staff, not necessarily. I think and I wonder if there's a disconnect between the executive and her staff, because it just doesn't seem like, the things that we are bringing forward that, a person would want to take action on. So I think that there's a disconnect there. And, and back to the AG, so Access, our Medicaid system has the Office of Inspector General. Our Inspector General has been with the agency since 2011. She is responsible for taking the reports that come in online through email from inside of Access and outside of Access. And it becomes a little bit of a problem when the Inspector General reports to the Director of Access. So how does that individual actually investigate people within the agency when their boss is, ultimately responsible? Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit problematic. The other problem with the Inspector General that we have seen, and why this is becoming such an ongoing issue, is there's a process to when somebody reports to the Inspector General, and it's on non-native land, she then has a duty to hand that over to the Attorney General, and then they make a decision whether they're going to do the FBI, if they're going to investigate. In 2023, that shifted, and it was a decision made by the director at the time that they could just go ahead and hand it off to whoever they wanted. So the Inspector General was taking reports and sending them directly to the FBI. And that is something you do if it happens on tribal land. But if it's not on tribal land, you wouldn't do that. You would send it to the AG. And what is becoming problematic is that bad actors that have been indicted they're settling. So it was a news report that came out yesterday where a man had fleeced our system for $21 million and he got 4 years probation.
So right now it just seems as if they're cutting deals and trying to make it go away to some degree.
Yeah.
Do you think that Hobbs and AG Mays are taking this seriously? Do you think they want to hold people accountable? You said before that nobody's been fired even, let alone whether they should be criminally prosecuted, but nobody's even been fired over this. Do you think they're taking it seriously?
I think they may be focusing, they're two separate. So I think that AG Mays is taking action on some indictments. What we're seeing come out of her office is things that happened sometimes quite a few years ago, and which is, it's good that she's doing that. But what's not happening is nobody's being held accountable for, again, the human loss, the abuse, and the crimes against humans, and not a single prosecution has happened with that. And so,
I just look at it, if $3 billion went missing on any program, somebody should probably lose their job.
Absolutely. And it is shocking when they haven't. And the thing is, I will meet with just about anyone, and I will sit down with the current governor. I sit down with AG Mays, happy to work on this and let's solve it instead of just doing what we're doing now, because it's, even though there are small actions being taken and there's a handful of people that are getting indicted, the problem is still happening. That
was going to be my next question. Yeah. Do you believe the fraud is still ongoing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is still ongoing.
Is it still the same model, or have they innovated in how they're ripping taxpayers off?
So here's the interesting fact. So originally it was this fee for service. They would bill it. When that got shut down, they moved over to the ACA plan. So bad actors would then just take Native Americans and anyone at that point and moved them over to a Obamacare plan, and then they would bill that.
So at ACA, okay, so that's like a health insurance plan.
Yes, health insurance plan.
And you can get reimbursed that way by doing that.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, but the thing is, there's a premium that comes along with that. So either facilities would pay that premium until the plan would max out, and then they would take that individual and put it back on the street. And then we started seeing where former bad actors would fund Native Americans to open up facilities on Native land because you do not need a license on tribal land. And I'm hoping that the exposure of that earlier this spring kind of put a halt to that. But what we are seeing right now is that these bad actors are starting up again. They are opening up facilities and they are starting to bill the way that they originally did.
So they went to this other model of trying to rip off the Obamacare plans and take money that way. But now they're going back and trying to do sober living homes and just hoping people forget about it and have quit caring.
Yes. So I had a meeting yesterday with tribal members and some other individuals, and they were showing us how these facilities are recruiting again. They're putting up posters at bus stops, and they're offering individuals $100, $200 if they bring them a Native American to their sober living home. And that is against the law. We tightened the rules on that, or the laws on that, this past session in one of the bills that I did. But it's absolutely a criminal what they are doing.
Yeah, and that gets into my last question. What can be done? Clearly more oversight. There needs to be investigations done. I don't have a lot of faith that, especially in an election season, that either Mays or Hobbs is going to want to do an investigation on this and have all this fraud that's going on under their administration be out there. So hopefully the Department of Justice and others can step in and do that. But outside of the oversight investigation side, what have you been working on legislatively to help make sure to bring this fraud to a halt?
Well, I ran several bills last session. One is, your regular marketplace plans, which would be like your Blue Cross, your Cigna, your Aetna, your traditional insurance plans. They also have a Medicaid avenue to use. And you don't see this kind of fraud there. When there is an uptick in anything, they're able to handle it. And so they're operating, their systems are working. Their providers are getting paid, the members are getting the services they need, and that is working smoothly. And so I worked on a bill last session to remove the fee for service from Access and have these regular plans bid on it to take over and manage the fee for service side.
We don't have open bidding right now?
No, it's sitting with Medicaid, with Access.
So it's an inside operation within the Access program.
Yes.
And isn't openly bid, so it can be more transparent and accountable.
Yes.
Okay.
And Access is a regulator. They're not a payor, and they're there to regulate, but we've put them in a position where they are a payor, and that's a huge problem. So I'd like to have more conversation and see us move towards that type of a system versus the way that it is now. And
do the companies themselves that participate in these programs that they have to bid on, are they generally supportive of that? Would they like to have more open? Okay,
they're very supportive. We had, I think I've lost count of how many stakeholder meetings we had with the plans, with providers, with Access, with the tribes as well. So, and we did that over session, and we took a lot of feedback from the tribes, and we got to a good place. It definitely needs a little more work, but it's something that we, be happy to have conversations about and see if we're going to run again, depending on, who's in the governor's office and what the appetite for it is.
It seems to me that the only people that would like an insider system like that would be ones that think that they can kind of game the system, because otherwise we should always have an open bidding system for any type of a government program like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as there's a lot of things that need to be changed and a lot of solutions to fix the system. But these people need to come back to work, even if it's in a hybrid model. You have individuals sitting at home working on a computer. What I've heard from previous employees that they're continuously training up. Managers leave, and now you the employee have to train your manager.
You're talking about within Access.
Within Access,
we're still doing work from home.
Yes, 90%.
90%
yes.
are not coming into the office.
That is correct.
That's outrageous.
It is outrageous. They need to come back to work. And, it's interesting because DCS, DS, they all work at the office. I think they're hybrid. And but they do come into the office. And so the other thing with Access is that when a member or a provider has an issue and they're calling in, if they can get somebody on the phone, they're really not getting good service or answers for that matter. So when you look at if a provider, so one of the things that's also happening is Access is still not paying providers on the fee for service for outpatient services, which is what this population needs. And so a lot of the providers have moved over to the market, to the plans in order to be able to treat and stay in business. So these employees have been pretty bad to providers in some of the things that they've said. And this is something that we addressed with Access through meetings, and we never came to a resolution with it. But bringing them back to work would solve that problem, because you're not going to be unprofessional and say things that you shouldn't be saying to a provider or a member if you have somebody sitting in the cubicle next to you.
No, the remote work, pretty much everybody in the private sector has largely moved back into some sort of where they're coming into the office. I hear these stories about government agencies that are still doing this remote work, not coming into the office. And you're absolutely right. Any agency that is supposed to be working with the private sector or providing a service, you need FaceTime. You can't do that remotely. Not only does it slow things down, but then it results in what you're describing, where it makes it a lot easier for these employees, especially if they're never getting fired, to maybe not treat the customers. They treat them as a burden rather than as a customer.
That's a very great way of putting it. We need full conflict of interest disclosures. So they do one, I think, with ADOA when people get hired, and that's it. But every employee at Access needs to have an annual full conflict of
interest. Say it 5 times fast.
Conflict of interest disclosure. Do they have another job? Do they have a consulting company? We're seeing a lot of these individuals who work that have consulting companies or real estate agents, and which begs the question, if you're a real estate agent, are you the real estate agent for somebody who's buying a home or renting a home to put a sober living home in it? And so it just, there's a lot of questions there. So we need conflict of interest disclosure. We need level 1 fingerprints clearance card on people who are opening up these facilities. I ran this bill last session and it was vetoed. So if you're coming into our state and you're going to open up any of these facilities, you need to either be a United States citizen or a legal resident and have a level 1 fingerprint clearance card if you are an operator at all. Now, that does not include people who do peer services or who provide the support services, because typically they are in recovery and they are some of the best people to treat them. But if you're going to own the facility, you need to have a background check. So that was vetoed. So we'll bring that back.
I would imagine even with these individuals that run the facilities, there needs to be more liability put onto them. Because this is just, it's outrageous that they can go in and do this. It doesn't seem like there's much oversight within the agency. But then on top of that, I mean, it seems like even some of them that are getting caught, they're getting these sweetheart deals and not even going to jail.
They're not. It's shocking. It's interesting because, back to the conflict of interest real quick. There was an individual who worked at DHS who was making $60,000 a year. He was operating multiple sober living homes, and how he
the same ones that don't go out for public bid, right? It's an insider game.
Yeah, and somebody happened to see him hop out of a brand new Range Rover, and they're like, "Hey, that's kind of interesting for somebody making $60,000 a year." And so he ended up getting busted. He was indicted. I don't know if he's gone to jail, and so conflict of interest. Joint accreditation for the provider. So this is where an outside agency comes and does the accreditation. They do the inspections every year, and it kind of removes access from that, and so that it's more of a neutral party, because we do need them surveyed and investigated, but it has to be professionals who do that. And I think that what we are seeing with some of the surveyors and investigators who work within DHS or with Access, they tend to be punitive. And so I think that removing that again and getting a third party in there would be better. In addition to, so you would still have, Access still has to survey and investigate, but you have these joint accreditation organizations that have been very, very helpful and beneficial. And we see that in good provider versus bad providers. And do you
think we need standards as far as people that are receiving treatment? Because it sounds to me like there's no performance there, that they get people in.
Outcome based. We absolutely need to have outcome based, and that is something that we're going to be engaged in conversation about. What is the expected outcomes, and if you can't just be churning people where they come in for 90 days and you treat them and then they leave for a week and then they come back, right? Like we have to.
What's the incentive of anybody ever getting better? Might as well just stay drunk.
So we want to incentivize that people are providing good care, and so that these individuals are going out and living great lives and being self-sufficient and not going back into the addiction. I talked briefly about the billing companies earlier, and the billing companies have had very little oversight. As a matter of fact, they didn't really become a thing until recently, when it was brought to my attention that there was these billing companies that would come in and set up the organizations for some of these people. Like some of these owners didn't speak English. They were from African countries and came in, and then you had the billing companies like ProMD, which was the Pakistani one that had over 135 providers that they were billing for, and they were able to fleece our system. So I will say there was one individual who did this, and she had a billing company, and she would set them up for these investors or whatever you want to call them who wanted to have these facilities, and she is in prison. So we've got one. But
they're using these billing companies as kind of a pass-through to be able to.
Yep. They know how to set it up. They know how to do the policies. They know how to all do it. It's like business in a box. And I'm not saying they're bad. We just have to have some oversight over them so that they are not doing the bad things that some of these organizations were doing. And there's so much more. But this is just the tip of how do we start to get this back on track. And when you think about it, $3.1 billion of taxpayer dollars, federal and state, and how could things look different for everyday Arizonans if that money didn't go out the door and it either paid for programs that we actually need or put that money back?
And I'm guessing this money we'll never get back.
They have out of the $3.1 billion, the last number I saw, they had collected $139 million back. So it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, it's a fraction of it.
Yeah.
Senator Werner, thank you so much for joining us today here at the State Room.
Thank you.
And for everybody watching, thank you for joining us, listening to the program today, learning more about issues that'll define the future of our state and keep Arizona free. Hope to see you again soon.